start his programs this way, so I'm going to play one. So just get comfortable and relaxed and just listen to his words. Well, we're not hearing it. So let me see what's going on.
I want to reach back to the meditation of 2 weeks ago when I raised certain very important questions and read as a background for the second question in our consideration this meditation from the inward journey. In thy presence we become aware of many divisions within the inner circle of the self. When we enter into communion with thee, we are never sure of the voice that speaks within us. We do not always know which voice is the true voice. Sometimes it is the clear call of the heart, remembering an unfulfilled hunger from other days. Sometimes it is but an echo of some failing impulse to good, which we had pushed aside that a private end may triumph even in the face of the distinct call of truth. Often it is the muttering of needs that do not shape themselves in words because they are one with all the ebb and flow of every passing day. At times the voice is like a clarion rising above all conflicts and confusions, so uttering the need for courage to stand against some evil, to witness for the good where the cost is high and the penalty great. Sometimes the voice is muted, sometimes telling us of hopes unrealized and dreams that will not rest until they incarnate themselves in us. All the while we pull back, but they will not let us go. In the midst of all the sounds rising above all the mingled words, there is a strange voice, but not quite a stranger. A man recognizes it. It seems to come from every part of him, but cannot rest itself on any point of sound. He waits, he listens. When all is still, he listens now at a deeper level of silence. In soundless movement there floats up through all the chambers of his being, encompassing all the tongued cries from many cells, one word, God. And the answer is the same, filling all the living silence before thy face. God, God.
Amen.
Amen.
So, this morning we are going to begin with a practice. As we ended last evening, we talked a little bit about creative silence and how powerful silence can be. And one of the reasons why I'm really interested in a practice of this is because, as we'll see a little bit later on today, this idea of centering down and being quiet is very much connected to Thurman's ideas about mysticism and social change. And so what I'd like us to do this morning is to find one other person that you do not know, have never met, and I want you to sit with them, try to meet them in the silence. We're going to do this for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have about 10 minutes of conversation between you and that person about what it was like to experience this, as well as if you heard any word for that person, and not just one word, but a word for them, and then we'll sort of come back together and talk about this experience. So, look around the room or online. I think you'll be randomly assigned to another person. One of you might want to keep time, and I want you to, and you know, there may be some other places you might want to go, maybe outside. Sit for 15 minutes, talk for 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back together. So definitely someone you have no idea who they are.
Wherever you like.
Oh, great. Well, welcome back to everyone here and online. And so I'd like to take a few minutes just to, you know, for us as a larger group to talk about what that experience was like, and if there was some, you know, to share whatever you'd like about. Some people describe it sometimes in much larger group as corporate silence, but in this case, Thurman kind of thought about this pairing up with people who lived in other places as creative silence. And so I'm just wondering if people would like to share a little bit about the experience, and either, you know, in whatever way. It might have been a positive experience for you, might not have been a positive experience for you, but just to share whatever you'd like. Anyone?
Willie, my name is Willie, and the experience that I had with grace was one that I never expected, because I have never in my life experienced come in contact with a stranger and look at her for 15 minutes without saying a word, and I felt uncomfortable at times.
Yes.
And once you look into each other's eyes, and the uncomfortable feelings left, and the positive kick in.
Okay.
And, it was very unique.
Unique?
Understanding,
Uh-huh.
and made me feel so good about it, because it was a spiritual connection there. But to me it was, but I couldn't tell you it was what her experience was until we finished talking. Finished with our 15 minutes. Then we talk about it. But I say this here because I wasn't a type of individual that people will say he's an everyday people, but he's a Christian. Because I wasn't brought up that way. But 20 years ago, I became a Christian. And I love being a Christian. And I love the people that God put in my life.
Mm-hmm.
For me to come here to meet, this is not my first time here, but this is my first time ever being with a stranger for 15 minutes and just silently looking at her face.
So looking at a stranger for 15 minutes is a very unique experience.
Right.
Yes.
You know,
In silence. Yes.
Because the average person that you come in contact with and you walking down the street and you look at them on a strange way, they ask you what you looking at.
Right. Yes.
You know,
Yes.
for me to look at a person like that, I mean, for her to look at me and I looking at her, I mean, it's a blessing.
So at first it was, and I'm just summarizing this for the people online because they can't always hear. So you're saying that at first it was a little uncomfortable,
Right.
but then it turned out to be something spiritual. You felt a spiritual connection.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Anyone else? Anybody online?
Yes, we have a guest that says, it's surprising how on point listening to each other silently.
Okay, all right. So perhaps maybe they heard something for that person? Possibly. I mean, sometimes, we do this in the middle of spiritual direction, companioning, where you might just stop and take some silence. And then something happens that might not have happened had you not. So this is, just sort of one of the ways that you can creatively use silence to, as Thurman said, illuminate something or allow something to illumine you in that quiet or in that sort of shared quiet. And, to realize that distance doesn't make a difference. And I know that I've had some experiences with groups leading retreats online in this past 2 years of pandemic, where you could actually feel the contemplative space. You could feel that connection. You could feel that deep connection with other people, even though none of us were in the same place. So it's really something, and I have not experimented with it on a regular basis yet, but I really am eager to find someone in another state and do that, and to see what happens. If you were to pick someone or have someone who would like to meet you in the silence, or a couple people, say once a week or once a month or whatever, at the same time every time. So there's many ways to creatively use silence. Are there any other questions or comments about this experience?
I have a comment. I spent time with Jillian, and even though we did not stare at each other in the face for 15 minutes, I could sense something about the beauty that she has. And I didn't even get a chance to share that with her because we got off into another conversation. But I could sense her depth of wanting to be in silence and her love for that solitude, the moment of solitude. So I wanted to just share that.
I had the sense of sharing the same air with this person, breathing the same air of the whole universe, people. And Columbus had the sense of sharing the same heartbeat, which was a nice, a wonderful connection there.
Oh, nice. There was a hand over here?
Yeah, I was sort of struck by staying open in what's possible, in the sense that where we chose to sit, honestly, and how we chose to sit, leaning against the hard surface. I think there was something important about that, even. and never mind sort of the naming that came up and what that meant as well. So that's all kind of interesting.
So where you chose to sit, which is sort of, as you said, a hard surface, or what sort of happened, right?
Every bit of it almost had some meaning to it for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I could say. Yeah, so it was just interesting.
Okay. Did you want to add anything?
I didn't think about the surface, but we were both struck by this morning's sermon calling for a revolution of tenderness. We're
Ah,
on this hard surface, and we shared, I think, some mutual tenderness.
okay. All right. So a revolution of tenderness. Oh, I like that. Yeah, all right.
I think the connections Eleanor and I share, I don't know if you realized it, was that we were talking about mothering and being mothers, and just the experience of maybe sacrifices that we make and connections we make to mothers. And I think that was the connection that came up. I think that's a really important connection for you.
The connection of being mothers and mothering.
And mothering.
Yes. Okay. Anyone else? Anyone
We have a-
online?
We have a couple of comments online. Let's see. One person says, I too have had the experience of a powerful connection with others sitting in centering prayer via Zoom. And someone else, let's see. Oh yeah, so so that's it actually.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad that we did this. I think it's really important to sort of feel what it's like to be able to connect, even with someone that you don't know, because you probably do know them, but you just don't realize that you know them. I always love looking at the meanings of words, and the derivation of the word recognize is to remember again. And so I think sometimes we recognize people even though we may not have ever met them. So we're going to end this session with another meditation by Howard Thurman. Then we'll take a quick break and start our next session. But I'm going to play this, and so if you'd like to get comfortable and listen to what he has to share with us, I think you will enjoy it.
Of my life. The Lord is.
My lovely speaker turns itself off, so I have to turn it back on.
The Lord is the strength of my life. The Lord is. Is God an idea in my mind? A rumor planted by old tales born of fear when life was young and death lurked behind every waiting bush? Is God the desire in my heart, a longing that goes always unfulfilled? Is God the restlessness I feel after dreams have come to pass and all my hopes have built themselves in facts? Is God the indescribable tenderness that creeps in the voice unawares, that steals into the fingers as they linger momentarily in the hand of a friend? Is God the endless churning of the turbulent sea, or the steady shining of the stars against the blackness of the sky? Is God the quenchless aching of the conscience over sins committed, and the vast cleansing in the soul riding on the wave of forgiveness that sweeps all before it. The Lord is. He is more than tongue can tell, than mind can think, than heart can feel. The Lord is my strength. When day is done, and in weariness I lay me down to sleep, when fear becomes a lump in my throat and an illness in my stomach, when the waters of temptation engulf me and I strangle beneath the waves, when I have thought myself empty and the solution to my problem hides, lurking in the shadows of my mind, when the disease of my body tightens its grip, and my doctor picks up the broken lances of his skill and knowledge and takes his leave, when the tidings are of brooding clouds of war and of marching feet and humming planes, moving in the awful rhythm of the dirge of death, the Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom and of what shall I be afraid?
Amen.
Amen.
All right, we're going to take about a 10-minute break, which should bring us to 10:07. So if you'd like to get up and stretch yourself and get tea or coffee or whatever is going to make you comfortable, we'll be back ready to roll at 10:07.
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
And we're back, so never
Okay. All right. So as we begin our next section here, we're going to be talking about Howard Thurman's pilgrimage to India, as well as his classic book, Jesus and the Disinherited, and what impact that had on the civil rights movement here in the United States. But first, we're going to begin with one of his meditations, which I think will help prepare us for this information. So if you get comfortable wherever you are, and we'll listen.
So much of the common life is lived under the shadow of the event that imprisons and encumbers the sin that opens up always dimensions of forgiveness that we have not explored, the temptations that are conquered and must be reconquered over and over and over, the grief that silently gnaws away at all the dreams and hopes and simple plans and far-flung ambitions of the common life. Grief that finds no answer in all the ways that we've tried. The fear of tomorrow and what it may bring. The fear of disease that cripples and lays waste and despoils and outrages the dignity of the self. We live under the shadow of the event. And our hearts reach out for some measure of release and relief. Hoping that our desires are not in vain. And so, our Father, it is with overwhelming relief that we come into thy presence and expose ourselves to thee and witness in utter amazement how thy Spirit transcends the event and turns the shadow into light. And for this we rejoice and give to thee the emptying of our cup of thanksgiving. This is so good, our Father. And we thank thee for just this swirling moment of freedom.
Amen.
Amen.
So, there are a couple of events, a couple of incidents that occurred in Thurman's life that led him to take on this role of trying to both feed the hunger of the human spirit and also to alleviate some of the horrendous lives that he saw around him, particularly within the Black community, of people living under Jim Crow, young people not really having anything to look forward to. And what he felt were people who had been deprived of their realization of their full potential. So he was very interested in Jesus and the Gospels, and actually, I think, started reading about them, scrutinizing them more and more as he moved through from being an undergraduate at Morehouse to seminary and afterwards. And so in the late 1920s, he began to talk about how many of the Psalms and some of the spirituals were really ways to keep people uplifted. And he also thought that maybe Jesus might serve as a model for a nonviolent religion. And more recently, in his book, Nonviolence Before King, historian Anthony Siracusa writes this about Thurman's work. He says, he began to sketch the outline of an ethical framework specifically for Black liberation, and his analysis led him to the premier theme of his later work, the very Jesus contribution he envisioned. As far as he was concerned, Jesus was a nonviolent non-cooperator with the Roman Empire, and his life circumstances were pretty much analogous to those of Black folks living in, particularly all over the country during that time and elsewhere, and really was interested in how he might model this vision. So the summer before he left for a pilgrimage to India, and let me just back up for a second and say that there were a group of Christians in India who were trying to encourage more Christianity there. And they thought that maybe if there were some people that looked more like Indians, that is, Black people from the United States, if they would come to India, they might actually be able to encourage other Indians. And what was interesting is that Thurman, when they first approached him, he was like, I don't think so. I'm not really interested in this. And it was a group that was sort of similar to the YWCA, the YMCA, I should say. And Thurman had actually been active in the YMCA since he was in high school. He was the president of the local chapter because they were very much into uplifting, particularly colored young men. But they continued to maintain segregated branches, which many of the Black folks who participated in the YMCA and the YWCA were like, this is fine, but no, what are we doing here? So Thurman said, well, I'm not really interested in this. So they came back to him again and again and again because they really wanted him. He said, I'm not going to go and proselytize Christianity. And so they said, well, how about if you just go and talk about anything that you'd like to talk about? So he said, well, maybe. And so then he said, well, can I bring my wife, who was Sue Bailey Thurman, and really a firecracker on her own. She was just amazing. And they had another minister, Edward Carroll, and his wife, Finola Carroll. So he was finally convinced that he would do this. And so they left the United States in October of 1935. But that summer prior to leaving for India, Thurman published a paper called Good News for the Underprivileged. And it was basically a number of talks and sermons that he sort of put together to begin to create this book about why Jesus was such a powerful figure for those who might want to find some inner freedom or some inner liberation, even though they may have been living under horrendous conditions. He was really particularly concerned about the what was happening to what he called self-estimate, but it was really self-esteem of many young black people and older black people who were getting this message that something was obviously wrong with them because they were not, full citizens in the United States. So they left for India, and when they arrived, Thurman had a very interesting conversation with a lawyer who was at one of the first stops where they gave lectures. And, he asked Thurman if he could, have a cup of tea with him after his lecture and have a talk with him. And so Thurman said, well, sure, because he was really into talking across cultures and things. So the lawyer invited him in to his office, and he said, what are you doing here? And to quote, I think an intelligent young man such as yourself here in our country on a Christian enterprise is a traitor to all of the darker peoples on the earth. How can you account for yourself being in such an unfortunate and humiliating position? And then this guy went on to give this very serious indictment of Christianity, especially with respect to slavery and discrimination. He said, you have lived in a Christian nation in which you are segregated, lynched, and burned. You will pardon me, sir. I do not wish to seem rude or disrespectful to you as a visitor in our midst, but I think that any black Christian is either a fool or a dupe. So those are pretty strong words. And Thurman was not, angry or, he actually was sort of moved by the fact that this particular person was so frank and upfront with him. And he agreed, and he said he didn't think his critique went far enough. He said Thurman made a very careful distinction between Christianity and the religion of Jesus. He said, I am a Christian, quote, because I think the religion of Jesus in its true genius offers me very many ways out of the world's disorders. So Thurman felt like Jesus' message was not one limited to Christianity or Christians because it revealed to a person the meaning of what they already have. In my opinion, the churches and all so-called Christian institutions are built and prevail upon the assumption that the strong man is superior to the weak man, and as such has the sound right to exploit the weak and be served by them. So, Thurman believed that religion was really intensely personal, and always a personal relationship between the individual and the divine. And anything interposing itself in this relationship was a distraction, a detour, or impediment. And so he told the young man, I really appreciate this conversation, and because I feel like things are transformed in the midst of sustained conversations like this. So he basically said, I'm a follower of the religion of Jesus. And when you begin to think about what was the religion of Jesus, what did he practice? What did he say? How did he act? For him, that was where the religion was. That was sort of the start of this trip. And of course, he got to meet Tagore, a very well-known Indian philosopher and poet. And they were on a pretty tight schedule. They would sometimes go from city to city, giving sometimes 7 or 8 lectures in a day. And so they tried from the very beginning to meet up with Gandhi. Gandhi, I think when they first got there, Gandhi was sick, and then the next time they were exhausted, and it was now February, and they were supposed to be leaving in March. They were beginning to wonder where they actually going to get to meet him. So they were in Bombay, and Thurman went out to take a letter, send a telegram to see if he could connect with Gandhi. And at the same time, a guy was coming towards him with a Gandhiji hat on, and they looked at each other and kept walking, and then they turned around. And so this guy had a letter from Gandhi saying, can you come? And he had a letter saying, can we come? And so they actually, it was really one of those moments, another kind of sacred synchronicity type of things. And so they did board a train, 3-hour train to Gandhi's camp. Gandhi actually came out to meet them when they arrived, which was very unusual. And so Thurman and Gandhi went to meet while Sue Bailey Thurman and Edward Carroll went to rest, because it was then 4 o'clock in the morning or something like that when they arrived. I think Finola Carroll had caught scarlet fever and sort of stayed in Bombay. But nonetheless, they had this meeting. Remarkably, there's a book on this meeting, on the entire meeting and what happened afterwards, called A Vision for a New World, Howard Thurman's Pilgrimage to India. And so they're in this meeting, and Gandhi was concerned because they had like 3 hours to talk before they had to board the train to get themselves back to Bombay on time. So Gandhi had lots of questions. He wanted to know about, what had happened in the United States, to basically tell him about interracial marriage, voting, just all kinds of things. Discrimination, public school education, churches, how they function. So Thurman gave him what we call a good old Negro history lesson so that he could be caught up on all these things. And then they started to have this extensive discussion. And interestingly, Gandhi basically thought that he would expect most black people around the world to become Muslim. Because he said in the Muslim religion, it's the only religion in the world in which there are no lines drawn from within the religious fellowship. Once you are in, you are all the way in. This is not true in Christianity. It's not true in Buddhism or Hinduism. If you had become Muslim, even though you were a slave in the faith, you would be equal to the master. So it was very curious that, Gandhi basically said, I just want you to understand that that's sort of where I'm coming from. But they both seem to have common ideas about respect for all religious creeds as a practical matter. They discussed the philosophy of ahimsa, which is nonviolence, and satyagraha, which is civil disobedience. Gandhi basically thought about ahimsa as not really just not nonviolence. Nonviolence, but basically, as he says, a force superior to all forces put together. It is a force beyond description that underlines and defines all of reality, the ultimate force of love. And I mean, really, that was sort of something that they felt like was characteristic in the universe. And it seemed to gel with Thurman's notion that there was some underlying moral order to the universe. The cosmos is the kind of order that sustains and supports and demands that the relationships between people and the relationships between people and God be one of harmony and integration. And so Gandhi sort of basically said, ahimsa is open to anyone, but it's rarely mastered by anybody. They also talked about what it would take, particularly in terms of vitality, to be able to sustain ahimsa and satyagraha. That is, that you need vitality in order to be able to have the resolve to non-cooperate with whatever the existing political structure was. And of course, at the time, the British were occupying India, and Gandhi was trying to get them out of there. And there's something really interesting to hear about just how they were thinking about Christianity. It's like, why would I become the religion of the person who is oppressing me? Like, that doesn't really make any sense. So He also mentioned to Thurman that oppression robs people of their self-respect and moral self-awareness. And so Thurman had just recently written in this paper on Good News for the Underprivileged that the fear of violence by people at the sort of bottom rings of society disorganizes the person morally from within. That is, if in fact the government is corrupt in their treatment of people, then other people begin to treat their own people in a way that is immoral. So there were just a number of amazing things that went on in this conversation. Gandhi encouraged Thurman to not start with any kind of mass political movement, but to have a few people learn this mastery. Now, let me just mention that this is in 1935, 1936. There were some movements going on in the United States at that time, sort of direct non-action or direct non-violence, but not necessarily in the southern part of the United States. Some in the Midwest, where you would get integrated groups of people to gather and then go like to a restaurant and sit down. So there was some movement going on. So this idea was just a little bit. And basically, Gandhi told Thurman that civil disobedience broke down in India, not because the people lacked courage or willingness, but because they lacked a vitality. There was so much poverty. And then they also had the issue of the untouchables, just all of that stuff going on. So, and they both agreed that without the quest for spiritual development, genuine social change becomes impossible. So let me say that again. They both believe that without the quest for spiritual development, genuine social change becomes impossible. Gandhi encouraged Thurman to be like a living sermon. Start small by resisting small acts of evil and work yourself up to the larger ones. And of course, he was one of those people that felt like you should be willing to die for your beliefs. He was into self-immolation. Otherwise, he believed it was just posturing and easy words, which is really pretty tough position. But before leaving their meeting, Sue Bailey Thurman, along with Howard and Edward, sang some spirituals to Gandhi. One was, "Were you there when they crucified my Lord?" emphasizing the healing of suffering. And "We are climbing Jacob's ladder," to emphasize the hope. And so after some silence, Gandhi made this prophecy and benediction. He says, "Well, if it comes true, it may be through the Negroes that the unadulterated message of nonviolence will be delivered to the world." So that basically is that meeting, which was monumental, both in terms of affirming what Thurman was already believing about the importance of utilizing these ideas, this sense that there was this oneness connection in the universe, and that anything interfering with that was a problem. Not a problem is an understatement. It was basically an offense against God, because God was about unity and about wholeness. And any hate, anything like that, was really against God. So Thurman, of course, was energized now as he came back to the United States, having met Gandhi. And there were a couple other people that met with Gandhi as well during that time, Benjamin Mays, and Olive Schreiner, who was doing work with women in South Africa. So there was some action with all of this. So I'm going to quickly play just a very short meditation from by Thurman, just to keep us going here.
I'm beginning this morning by reading a meditation. I'm beginning this morning by reading a meditation. If thou standest beside me, nothing can prevail against me. There are times when the sense of aloneness is very acute. Often these are times of struggle where the odds are uneven. Curious indeed is it that the sense of not being alone is apt to be most acutely felt when the concentration upon the matter at hand is absorbing. This means that there is available at the moment no margin of me exposed to the presence of God. To be aware that God is standing beside me calls for some measure of detachment from my own personal struggle and turmoil. If thou standest beside me, it is entirely possible that the presence of God may be most acutely felt in and through the struggle and the turmoil. It is not something apart from my involvement, but a quality of presence that emerges from the midst of my tempests. Or more acutely, it becomes a quality of the tempest itself. Sometimes this identification becomes very confusing, causing me to say, for instance, that God brings the struggle. It is sufficient for me to know that he is found in the midst of all that befalls me. Nothing can prevail against me. The affirmation is the result of the disclosure of the presence of God in the midst of what befalls me. First, he is felt as being within and among the struggling elements of my experience. Then out of the midst of these, his presence emerges and becomes one who stands by my side. It is then that I am lifted up and strengthened. If thou standest beside me, nothing can prevail against me.
Amen. So in 1949, Howard Thurman published his classic book, Jesus and the Disinherited. And he wrote this book for a variety of people. Not only was it directed towards African Americans in the United States, but also all the people that were involved in anti-colonial struggles in the 1940s and 30s in Africa, in India, and in Asia. And he wanted Disinherited to be part of the title to encourage people who were in these colonized and oppressed circumstances beyond American soil. And he says in the beginning of this book, the significance of the religion of Jesus to people who stand with their backs against the wall has always seemed to me to be crucial. It is one emphasis which has been lacking, except where it has been a part of a very unfortunate corruption of the missionary impulse, which is, in a sense, the very heartbeat of the Christian religion. My interest in the problem has been and continues to be both personal and professional. This is the question which individuals and groups who live in our land, always under the threat of profound social and psychological displacement, face. Why is it that Christianity seems to be impotent to deal radically and therefore effectively with issues of discrimination and injustice on the basis of race, religion, and national origin. Is this impotency due to a betrayal of the genius of the religion, or is it due to a basic weakness in the religion itself? The question is searching for the dramatic demonstration of the impotency of Christianity in dealing with the issue is underscored by its apparent inability to cope with it within its own fellowship. And then he goes on to say, I do not pretend that I have found an answer on the pages that follow, but I am deeply convinced that in general area of my inquiry is to be found in the answer, without which there can be little hope that men may find in Christianity the fulfillment which it claims for its gospel. This is quite a start to this book, but he really wanted to inspire and encourage, offer courage to people who he felt really were trying to find some dignity and creativity in the presence, in the present. And if you think about it, this was written in the 40s sometime. To think here we are still having people to address these issues. But he wanted to know what was there in the teachings of Jesus to those who were standing with their backs against the wall, the poor, the disinherited, and the dispossessed. And he felt like that there was a striking similarity between the position of Jesus in Palestine and that of the vast majority of American Negroes at the time. He felt like that part of Jesus' message was about a radical change in the inward center of individuals, their inner attitudes. One of the things that Thurman did when he returned from India is that he actually wrote a series of lectures and gave a series of lectures they were called The Significance of Jesus. And he was just very interested in Jesus because he felt like Jesus challenged the social and political and economic order for those people like himself who were stigmatized during that time. And that for him, the will of God was primary question for everything. In other words, to ask the question for Jesus was, what is the will of God concerning this, as opposed to what will people say about me or what's most expedient. And with these essays, Thurman really left us with some questions about what characterizes contemporary Christianity. Has it neglected the essential message of Jesus about love, about intimacy with God through silent, solitary prayer, the worship of God alone as opposed to the worship of material things, etc., or power, and the advocacy of the dignity and worth of all people and reverence for God's holy creation. That is what Thurman interpreted Jesus as saying in the Gospels, that God loved every one of us, that he loved the entire creation, that we should only worship God and not these other things, and that it is important for us to keep that in mind. Now, Thurman felt like we keep forgetting that Jesus was not a Christian. Jesus was not a Christian. He was actually Jewish, and that, in fact, people sometimes don't understand that. So let me just pause here for a second and say, too, that Thurman was still haunted by this idea about the church condemning his father for not going to church when he was a little boy, and his grandmother was illiterate. She was not allowed to learn how to read. And so he used to read the Bible to her, but she would not allow him to read many of the Pauline letters, especially the ones around slavery and slaves obeying your masters. He was always very curious about that. And so he takes this curiosity into his work in this book, Jesus and the Disinherited. because he says, you know, there's a difference between Jesus and Paul, because Paul was a Roman citizen. So if Jesus, as a poor Jew, got kicked in a ditch, he was just a poor Jew in the ditch. But if Paul got kicked into the ditch, he could at least appeal to the state. So it's not surprising that they might have different views on the state and the government. So basically, he says that, you know, perhaps that is why Paul seemed to have some of these ideas about, the government and what they were allowed or not allowed to do. He also felt like that in many ways that part of the genius of Jesus had to do with this idea of what is going on within the spirit of a person. So he says, Jesus basically looked at individuals and said this: no external force, however great or overwhelming, can at long last destroy a people if it does not first win the victory of the Spirit against them. So basically, it goes on to say, with increasing insight and startling accuracy, Jesus placed his finger on the inward center as the crucial area where the issues would determine the destiny of the people. He recognized with authentic realism that anyone who permits another to determine the quality of their inner life gives into the hands of that other the keys to their destiny. So I'm going to repeat that. He recognized with authentic realism that anyone who permits another to determine the quality of their inner life gives into the hands of the other the keys to their destiny. So it goes on to say, if a person knows precisely what they can do to you or what epithet they can hurl against you in order to make you lose your equilibrium or your temper, they will always keep you under subjection. And so basically he is saying to people that God created something special in your inward center. Claim that. And not allow what is going on around you to affect how it is that you are living from this center. You know, this was a psychology professor's delight to be able to read this, right? Because it really is important in terms of how we respond to things, which determines the degree to which other people have power over us. And then, of course, he goes on to talk about the three hounds that track the world of the disinherited. There's fear, and he comments on the fact that particularly for people who are disinherited, there's always fear everywhere. And if you just think about people who right now are concerned about, who are undocumented and concerned about being found and deported, or, young black men, jogging through a neighborhood, right? So, I mean, this fear is still very much real. He really felt like it was just absolutely horrible that someone would die without having committed a crime. The crime is just their caste or their religion or their race. And again, we are still there. So he, in terms of fear and this physical violence, he felt like that it was really important for people to understand that they are a holy child of God. This was part of his antidote to beginning to build a self that was strong and that was worthy. You are worthy because God created you. You don't need anybody else to tell you that, and no one else can take that away from you. He also felt like, especially for children, he said, I have seen children grow up without fear, with quiet dignity and high purpose, that the mark which they set for themselves has even been transcended. So God, he says, the prophetic nature of the religion of Jesus is that God cares about everything, even little old me, and that it's important. The second thing that he said tracks the disinherited is hypocrisy or deception. And that is that oftentimes what people will do is to try to find a way to manipulate or try to get something from the more powerful other person. And he talked about, the unmerited flattery that people sometimes will offer. And certainly people have had to do that through slavery, through Jim Crow, through sharecropping, all those places where, and even on the job, we do this sometimes. We will give people what he calls unmerited flattery. And Olive Schreiner talked about this. This was a South African social activist who he shared a lot of correspondence about women doing the same sorts of things to be able to get what they needed from men. So he says, though, that if we continue to call a bad thing good, we basically lose our sense of moral distinctions. And I sort of say, as long as we keep playing these games with the more powerful person, it sort of results in a kind of sordid and degrading relationship between the two. He says, Jesus basically demanded genuineness from everybody. He was very hard on hypocrites. And he felt that it was most important that people are able to basically speak without fear, but in a civil way. And, his antidote for hypocrisy was basically that if you need something, your source is always God. Your source is always God. You may think it's the person that's more powerful, but your source is always God. And I think it's something that we sort of come into this world, we learn, about. And we'll come back to how it is that you're able to utilize God as a source when you're in an uneven relationship where there is some more powerful person that has control over you. But he says, the hypocrisy is just is unfortunate. And I always say, you don't need to butter up the boss or manipulate somebody to get something. To put it in sort of everyday words. And then lastly, Jesus rejected hate. And he talks about the variety of enemies that we can create, sometimes within our own families, sometimes people that we would hate because of the ways in which they are keeping us in a particular position. And in Jesus's time, this might have been the tax collectors, the people who were collecting taxes, exploiting people with taxes, and even the Romans who, were occupying that time. But he says that, sometimes a little hatred at our bitterness at the beginning is not surprising because you're sort of waking up to the fact that you don't deserve this behavior. But at some point, hate becomes something that basically eats away at you as an individual. And that it is really important to understand that hatred, as he says, destroys the core of the life of the hater. Above and beyond all else, it must be borne in the mind that hatred tends to dry up the strings of creative thought in the life of the hater, so that their resourcefulness becomes completely focused on the negative aspects of their environment. The urgent needs of personality for creative expression are starved to death. Person's horizon may become as completely dominated by the intense character of the hatred, and there remains no creative residue in their mind and spirit to give to great ideas, great concepts. So he says Jesus rejected hatred. It was not because he lacked the vitality or strength. It was not because he lacked the incentive. Jesus rejected hatred because he saw that blind hatred meant death to the mind, death to the spirit, death to communion with God. He affirmed life, and hatred was the great denial. To him, it was clear. So, and as you know, Jesus always said, pray for your enemies and those that persecute you, for they are one with you in the kingdom. So he finishes this book talking about love and how difficult it can be in some cases, but that, you know, there were the two great commandments about loving God and loving your neighbor, and certainly Jesus talks more about neighbors and who that neighbor is. And in the case, of course, of Jesus's time, you know, that it's that Samaritan, it's that Roman, and this time it's that person who happens to be taking advantage of you. Pray for them. And you know, he says to love certain types of people, requires an uprooting of the bitterness of betrayal, the poison, the hardiest poison that grows in the human spirit, and that person who is preventing you from realizing your dream is not just some obstruction, but they are a holy child of God as well. And so he says, awaken that awareness in them, and they will have to attack their betrayal as only they can from the inside. So you're beginning to see these little elements that get weaved into the civil rights movement. That is, that you treat other people with respect and civility, even though they may be spitting on you or doing whatever it is that they can, violence, etc. And so it is this idea of being able to move beyond this place where people are at each other, they're violently confronting each other, to a place where they they start to have more natural, Thurman would call them more natural relationships, genuine relationships, where all of these other conditions fall away. And basically, Thurman believed that in order to love another person, it needs to be between two freed spirits, freed of status, freed of attitudes about race, freed of attitudes about power, whatever it is that seems to keep you from connecting with another person, to be able to let those things go. Because as you know, when you arrive here as an infant, as a child, you don't know any of that. You learned all of that. You know, what all that means. So it's really important to think about those things. So, you know, I've given you a very quick summary of Jesus and the Disinherited. Let me just say that it is worth reading, because I have not even been able to touch the depths of that book. It's not a long book, but it's a great book to read about that. So I'm going to play a meditation by Thurman, and then we'll take a break.
There often seems to be a clearly defined limit to human endurance. Everyone has had the experience of exhaustion. If you cannot get to bed, you're sure that you will go to sleep standing, for instance, and then something happens. It may be that a friend comes by to see you, a friend whose path has not crossed yours in several years. It may be that there are tidings of good news or of tragedy. At any rate, something happens in you with the result that you are awake, recovered, even excited. A few minutes before, the weariness was closing in like a dense fog, but now it is gone. Of course, knowledge about the body and mind gives an increasingly satisfying explanation of this kind of experience. The important thing, however, is that beyond the 0 point of endurance, there are vast possibilities. The precise limitations under which you live your particular life cannot be determined. Usually, the stimulus, the incentive, must come from the outside, be brought to you on the wings of external circumstance. This means that the power available to you in great demand is not yours to command. I wonder about this. The simple fact of revitalizing human endurance opens a great vista for living. It cannot be that what is possible to the body and nervous system by way of tapping the individual resource on demand is denied the spirit. The spirit in man is not easily vanquished. It is fragile and tough. You may fail again and again, and yet something will not let you give up. Something keeps you from accepting no as a final answer. It is this quality that makes for survival of values when the circumstances of one's life are most against decency, goodness, and right. Men tend to hold on when there seems to be no point in holding on because they find that they must hold on. It is often at such a point that the spirit in man and the Spirit of God blend into one creative illumination. This is the great miracle. The body and the nervous system know this. I'm sure that each one of us has had the experience of coming to what we commonly refer to as the end of our rope. Our physical endurance reaches its highest point, or depending upon your point of view, its lowest point. And we know that we can't go on. We just don't have enough physical energy left to last another minute. And then we have all experienced how something often happens to us. We get what is called a second wind. We are able to tap resources that under ordinary experiences of living are not apparently available to us. But when a certain kind of overwhelming demand is made of our bodies, the body seems to know where the secret energy is, and it unlocks the door and the energy flows. Now, there are certain physiological explanations for it, but they are really not explanations. They are descriptions of what happens. But precisely what is the thing that makes this possible, we do not quite know. The only thing that we do know is that under certain circumstances we are able to go beyond what we thought we were able to do or to experience. Now, this is true with our bodies. It is true again and again with the renewal of our minds. Now, if it is true with our bodies and true with our minds, then it must of necessity be also true with our spirits. When we are up against a situation that exhausts us, that wearies us out because of its demands upon us, we discover again and again that there are boundless resources of the Spirit that are available to us. And men of religion say that this resource is in God, and we are able to lay hold on this additional energy that makes it possible for us to do what under other circumstances is impossible to do. Over and over again, there is something about the human spirit that insists that there is available additional resources, more than we have ever experienced in the living of our lives, And it is then that we discover that the test of life is often found in the amount of pain, disturbance we can absorb without spoiling our joy.
Amen.
Amen.
All right, we're going to take about a 8 to 10 minute, more like a 8, just to keep us on track, a break. So, get up, maybe take some time outside. It's beautiful. Take some fresh air. And we will start again at about 11:15. I think we should get going.
And anytime.
Okay, all right, so most everyone is back. So we're going to do something similar like we did last night. I want to give you about 10 minutes to reflect on a couple of questions. And one of those has to do with if you perceive any difference between the religion of Jesus, that is what Jesus said and how he lived on a daily basis, and contemporary Christianity that emerged after his death and resurrection. So that's one question to sort of consider. And then the other one is, who and what groups of people do you find challenging to love? And how might your encounters with God help you to surmount these challenges? So take about 10 minutes individually to just sit with those questions, and then we'll break up into groups. Okay, any questions? Everybody got it? Ready? Okay. So, attention every time. So, I was speaking from 2 books today, Visions of a Better World, Howard Thurman's Pilgrimage to India and the Origins of African American Nonviolence. This is Quentin Dixie and Peter Eisenstadt, which was, published in, I'm just trying to check the date on it. Although I should say that last year, Peter Eisenstadt wrote a long book on Thurman called Against the Hounds of Hell, which was, by the way, the original title for Jesus and the Disinherited. And the publisher, at least that's what Thurman wanted. And the publisher was like, no. And if anybody's ever tried to publish a book, you know that some things are out of your control, because the publishing is about the business of selling books, and so if they don't think a title's going to sell, they're not going to put it on there. So, but this is a lovely book about the trip to India, how it got started, what happened, what Thurman took away from that, just published in the 90s. And then Against the Hounds of Hell, which is 400 pages, but packed, as historians do, with lots of information about Thurman, was published this past 2021 by Peter Eisenstadt, who I think is at University of South Carolina now, if I'm not, or Clemson. Sort of professor emeritus, but connected. And then, of course, Jesus and the Disinherited, which is, to me, just a classic. And as I mentioned, it, with the epilogue, it's 102 pages. So not an easy read, but, you know, you can go through it. But it's one of those kind of books where you read it and then you want to read it again. And then you want to go back and underline and read the underlined, and, you know, so it's one of those. All right, so questions, comments from this session. Do we have any questions online? Any questions in person?
Not yet.
Yes.
You spoke about your sort of naming the two different titles made me further think about this. You spoke about sort of like the influence of Jesus and Disinherited on the civil rights movement, initial civil rights movement. I'm curious about the sort of dialogue between Thurman and the Black Power movement, and sort of how that evolved. Like, it seems like he's saying something and naming this the Hounds of Hell, about those who are controlling and pulling the strings, you know? And I'm just sort of curious how that...
So now, which part of the Black Power movement are you speaking of? Are you speaking of the 70s part, or are you speaking of pre-60s part, or which part? Because, you know, there are parts.
Yeah, right. Well, just sort of subsequent to the level of like this sort of more nonviolent, more like a aggressive approach to social change and to identity and those kinds of things.
Yes. You know, Thurman had a chance to actually see all that.
Yeah,
Can you
right.
imagine, you know, from what the situation was when he was a little boy to where it was when he died in 1981? I mean, like, massive. And so, and this is a true story. It's just amazing. But I had a talk recently with one of my professors in college, and he'd never talked to me about Howard Thurman, but he actually used to study the Black Panthers, and he would go and talk to Howard Thurman about the Black Panthers. And Thurman was actually very interested in not necessarily the violence, but what they were doing in the community. And because he was really not he was not into violence. He had issues with nonviolent groups, even the Forum of Reconciliation, which he was a part of back in the 30s and 40s, which was a pacifist group. You know, he wasn't completely all in because they weren't completely committed certainly to racial discrimination. And I'll talk a little bit more about that this afternoon. But he was very intrigued with, you know, what they were doing. And even during World War II, despite the fact that, again, he was more of a pacifist, he would write to soldiers. You know, he held correspondence. He wanted to support them. I mean, it's like, okay, so this is what it is. So let me see what I can do to support those who have to be part of this. But he was, I think he held this position not in a political way, but in a spiritual way. Again, he was always supporting the oneness of God, the unity, and as we'll see when we talk about mysticism and social change this afternoon, it was really about a kind of mysticism where you go inside and come up in community or common unity or oneness. And so whatever was in the way of the oneness, you know, his position was that even with the civil rights movement, it was, again, about the oneness. And so, because, you know, with Thurman, and people say this all the time about him, it's like, you're there at the surface, but just, you're gonna have to go deeper with him. He's always another level deeper than where people are. So, you know, his position was, you know, you all can decide whether or not you want to participate in racial reconciliation if you want, but just know you will never have union with God without it. Full union with God without it. So because he understood in some ways that, you know, we are spirits still connected to God as far as he was concerned. And whether that appears in a form that you like, that's up to you. But just know that in the end, you're going to have to figure it out. You said you had a question?
We do. We have an online comment. We have two of them. The first one, a guest says, I find the war in Ukraine and the specter of expanded war that has created to be an oppressive weight on my spirit. Howard Thurman's teaching on maintaining spiritual strength undaunted by oppressive forces beyond my control speaks to me as a powerful guide through these times. And another guest says, seems to me that pacifism is a political position, while nonviolence for Howard Thurman and Dr. King was a spiritual posture.
Yes. Well, first, let me just address the first comment. That was one of the reasons why I played the meditation events that imprison, because that was the name of the first one. And in part, it's a reminder that we always live under some event. You know, it may be a war, it could be that you have cancer. You know, I live with a chronic illness, basically, you know, having had to, so there's always, as he says, you're always living under the shadow of the event. So how is it that you can connect with God in a way that you are able to see some light, even in the shadow of the event? You know, where is that place for you? And some people are able to connect with that even in a hospital bed. I know there were many times in the middle of the night, you know, or early morning, where it's just you and the quiet and God. So he was always trying to remind us that as a spirit, you're always able to raise yourself above the event and be able to exist in the event and not be overcome by it. You know, I gave a talk to a group a couple weeks ago about living in the world and not being overcome by it. You know, there's all kinds of guides out there, you know, the Psalms being one of them, about how do you exist? You know, we keep saying, well, we're not of this world, but we're in it. Well, so how do you live that, right? You know, just in part to address the person last evening who was also saying, every time I get quiet, I just have despairing thoughts. And one of the questions is you need to monitor your thoughts. What do you think about mostly during the day? You know, it's very difficult to get rid of your thoughts, but you can pay attention. And I actually have a practice where I set a timer 10 minutes before the hour. So, because I'm always going to snooze it, right? So that at around the top of the hour, I'm asking myself, so where am I right now? You know, how am I feeling? What am I thinking about? And do I want the next hour to be that? So, you know, again, we have innumerable opportunities throughout the day to connect with the presence, because the presence isn't going anywhere. But our thoughts can't take us someplace else. So I think it's real important. And as I said last night, to regulate what it is that you are taking in. Because as far as I'm concerned, the news every night is not about what happens during the day in the world. It's about what the news director decided is going to sell. And, you know, you can easily get addicted, wrapped up in all of that. And so then, yeah, it looks pretty bad.
Unless you're the one being shot at.
Yes. But, you know, even though, and, you know, we have some examples from the Holocaust of people who, even under those conditions, were still connecting with God.
But you know, Jesus stopped the one act of violence from cutting off the soldier's ear. And that's, you know, he did make a physical, you know, an entry into stopping the violence and
Yes.
aggression.
Yes.
Mostly preached against it, but did stop to say so much.
Right.
And that's the question that really disturbs me about how we stop the violence that's happening, you know, in our towns, in our cities, and in our world. Not Ukraine notwithstanding.
Right.
And, you know, there's this whole theology of just war, of a just war, how we went into World War II
Yes.
to stop it.
Yes. Yes. And I think that Thurman would also continue to say that it is important to connect with God as often as possible, so that you can, even in the midst of all that, still exist. It doesn't steal your joy, right? Doesn't steal your joy. What was that second comment about?
The second comment said, seems to me that pacifism is a political position, while nonviolence for Howard Thurman and Dr. King was a spiritual posture.
Yes. So, Thurman sort of stepped away from some pacifists who were so focused on the war, but didn't seem to see the conditions that were existing in the United States at the time domestically. I'll talk a little bit more about that this afternoon as well. You know, very much felt that, and Polly Murray, I don't know if any of you are familiar with her, but she is was an Episcopal priest and just extraordinary person. She's got a lovely memoir out called Song in a Weary Throat. And she also was engaging in nonviolent direct action in the 1940s, trying to desegregate the restaurants around the Howard University campus where she was a law student. But she says that she understood that her cause was linked to all the causes around the world where people were being oppressed. That was one of the things that gave her some vitality, some desire to move against that, but also that as she studied more and more of Gandhi in India, she realized that there was an element in the religion, I think more Jainism, where people are concerned about the heart of the enemy. You know, not necessarily to change the heart of the enemy, but to realize that that person needs something. So, in that way, nonviolence, particularly in terms of being civil and being respectful, she cites one incident where they had a bus issue of, you know, of not willing to sit on a broken seat when there was another one available. This was an interstate bus situation. And so they got thrown in, she and her friend got thrown in jail, horrible conditions. But she said the more that they were kind and respectful to their jailers and the other people that were in jail, it just changed the atmosphere. And so she was actually seeing this whole idea of satyagraha work in action. So, you know, it's important for us to understand what is the underlying motive here. You know, and in Thurman's case and King's case, it wasn't just about getting rights. It was about restoring an order that they thought God had created and we had corrupted. So, I think, and sometimes people, particularly now, push back on this idea of, so we need inner transformation to get out of, to get the more social transformation. Well, we need some of everything. We need the inner transformation, but we need the corporate silence. We need the corporate connection. We need communities, transformation of communities that can then do other kinds of transformations. So I think it can operate on all those levels at the same time. Any other questions or comments?
I have a thought that has just been inclined to come up from year to year as I think about this difference between the religion of Jesus and Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's one of those rhetorical questions that, probably there might be a lot of answers, but I always wanted to just discern, well, when did the big change come in between the early church, the religion of Jesus, and Christianity?
So the question is, not the question, the comment is really a rhetorical question.
Yes.
Around when did the change come in?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. There are lots of biblical scholars who would probably,
It never,
Yeah,
you said what?
said it never did change. I mean, it was,
Well, I don't know, there were a few.
Look at Constantine.
Yeah, well, there's that, right? There's Constantine, where the religion is sort of normalized by the government. There's that. There's even, some arguments between Jesus's brother, James, and Paul. There's that place. So, there could be lots of places where perhaps maybe the message got altered or distorted. That's a good rhetorical question to sit with. Because, when you think about all the various denominations of Christianity and how they're practiced, it's almost as like there's just spin-offs all over the place. Any other questions, comments? We're good? Well, we'll see you back at 2:00. Enjoy your lunch and afternoon.
So
What?
we can go for lunch now.
Yeah.
It's being served now, okay? All right.